Well, I'm running for state representative because I've lived here now for full 16 years, and I've seen a lot of missed opportunities. And these are opportunities that I think, had I been in a position of leadership, I've been able to take it on and gotten better results from than what we've seen. And I'll give you some examples. So I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Chemistry at LSU Shreveport. And our university is a prime example of a comprehensive regional university that has never reached its potential, in my opinion. And this is for a number of reasons. The investments have not been made, mostly because of the geography and the distribution of population in Louisiana, that we are outnumbered, and we have not made a case and a strong commitment for why we would need to have the programs that we lack. For example, I don't hear people complaining as loud as I feel in my heart that we need a College of Engineering in Louisiana. It's extremely important that we get this. We're the only city that I know of our size, metropolitan area, that does not have access to an engineering school within our own community. I think it would be ridiculous to expect people to have the only option to commute every day out to Ruston, or worse yet, Baton Rouge, or to other areas throughout the region. Secondly, in being an educator, I've worked a lot with the public schools. And I see a lot of problems in our public schools. For example, there are 37 schools right now that are rated D or F. And this is the state's own rating system. And yet, the state is not approaching the problems in the right way. It's not simply a matter of leaving this up to the individual school districts. There are problems at the state level. There's too much mandated testing. There's a lack of treating the teachers like professionals, giving them the professional development that they need and the time that they need to achieve their results. And so far what I've talked about is my experience as an educator. But everything that we want to do from here, for example, economic development, maintaining our infrastructure properly, teaching our young people to be problem solvers and to stay here and take on the problems and provide them with opportunities. That all depends on everything I've talked about up to this point. Having the proper sort of comprehensive regional university, having the proper public schools that are actually performing properly and have equity across the school district. So everything's tied to education. Okay. Yeah, the infrastructure is definitely a problem. And I believe that the top three problems are the Jimmy Davis Bridge, for one. Okay. We also have a problem with the Red River itself, which is prone to flooding, also rising groundwater, which is going to destabilize the foundations and the roads themselves, anything that relies on soil. And then the third thing is there's conditions of bridges out in Webster Parish, which has recently been in the news, and Fiberbond has issued a notice that they're going to make a decision about leaving this area, taking a $35 million payroll and 750 jobs possibly to Texas. All of these problems go back to one thing that we've been neglecting. And when I say we, I mean our elected officials. They haven't been getting the job done. We need to focus on fixing what we have first, rather than looking at whatever glitters is gold and pledging hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to new mega projects which we don't have the money for. I'll give a specific example. This year in the legislative session, very late in the session, there was some funding that became available for this region of the state, $100 million in addition to the $24 million that we already have, to fix the Jimmy Davis Bridge. And by fix, I mean it needs to be replaced. And then if we're going to use the old structure, it has to be totally renovated after the replacement is in place, and then maybe we could have 4 lanes is what my goal would be. Well, what was done was that very late in the session, without any consultation or anything with the constituents, there was a change made where the money for that was going to come from the Deepwater Horizon BP settlement was reappropriated or reassigned, some people say funneled, over to another project. And that was a big mistake, because now we don't have money for either project. The Jimmy Davis Bridge is at about a 36% sufficiency rating, and that was the last time it was checked was 2 years ago. That is really critical that we do something about it in a matter of a couple years, not decades. And now we're set back to ground zero. People say, oh, it has something to do with the birds that were there. No, it does not. The bird issue is something that could readily be settled outside of the nesting season. So this is something that I feel very strongly about, that we are not allocating our resources, even money that we have. And I don't necessarily feel that we even need to raise any taxes. I understand that the gas tax in Texas is the same as it is here, and it would make it difficult for us to go off on our own and to raise it significantly. So if we just set our priorities straight, focus our priorities on the people and our needs, then we'll be successful in our infrastructure. Okay, well, that $100 million that you're referring to is the same $100 million that was funneled away from the Jimmy Davis Bridge. So I'm aware and have been very well informed about the I-49 connector, and it's going to cost about $800 million to build that, and that's just for 3.6 miles. And I do not feel that it's necessary that we go forward with that. If you look at what other cities are doing, cities that have a vision for economic development, and I can name a few: Chattanooga, Syracuse, Portland, Dallas, Milwaukee, Seattle. All of these cities have recognized that running interstate freeways right through the heart of the city does not promote better quality of life, does not promote economic development, actually makes the city more miserable, more dirty, and unhealthful to live in. And I agree with the studies that have been found. Now, what can we do to develop Allendale? There are some very important things that we can do. I look there and what is really at the very back end of Allendale, and I see a tremendous opportunity for development with cooperation from a company who is a good friend of the Chamber, and that's the AEP SWEPCO plant. Their Arsenal Hill plant is set to be decommissioned in 2 to 3 years. They're already buying 40% of their energy from West Texas, and so that's wind energy, and we are going to move towards 50% very soon. When that plant is decommissioned, we can use that property along the bayou in a way that would be very picturesque, kind of like the San Antonio Riverwalk, maybe without some of the commercialism, but the beauty, someplace where people would love to live. Allendale already has a beautiful topography. So people know me as somebody who is a thought leader, an independent thinker. When I helped lead the fight out at Camp Minden, I was very clear in my expectations that things needed to be done right. And so I don't follow the herds of sheep. I heard a commissioner a few years ago on our Caddo Parish Commission say, well, if that area was meant to be developed, it would have developed itself by now. And I think that is just completely the wrong attitude, because if we truly do economic development right, we're going to have a lot of people, young people especially, that are going to want to live close to downtown. They're going to want to have access to affordable housing, to nature, to that beautiful bayou, better access between north and south. And that's something that we can do right. It's not going to be done right by creating an off-ramp economy, which is really one of the generally the most seedy parts of any city. And I came from Detroit. I know it. Thank you. Well, I remember the shortfalls very clearly because higher education is the only part of Louisiana's budget that is not granted any constitutional protections. And so the cuts almost always first are targeted towards higher education, and then there can be some give and take and spread some of the pain around in the legislative sessions. It indeed was painful. We suffered a lot. We have a $2 billion deficit in deferred maintenance in our university systems alone. So I saw that there were expectations to close that because we have to under the Constitution. And I saw all the things that were considered, and the sales tax was not the first choice. It was something that was really the only thing that the two parties could agree on, and so it was what went through. And it first went through as a 1% increase. Then after 2 years, they took off a little bit more than half of it because the budget picture looked better. And we were no longer raiding trust funds and looking for money in couch cushions and whatnot. We were actually truly making our expenses meet our revenue, which is what we need to do. And I think what has been done is a step in the right direction. I do not want to go back to the years before 2016. Those were miserable times for Louisiana, and they were very partisan times. And I'm not a partisan person. I'm a problem solver and a very practical person. So going forward, what I would like to see would be to target decreasing the sales tax. I would love to see the sales tax in this area go down to 7.5% rather than the 9.05% that it is now. But we're not going to be able to do that if we don't get our economic development house in order. And why should we expect that we can do it if we're making the same bad decisions? I was out there at the GM plant when the people from Elio Motors were taking all of our commissioners for a ride in their vehicle. And I knew that thing just wasn't going to work, but I was not in a position of leadership. My question is, where were our leaders at that time? All googly-eyed and oohing and aahing over this vehicle that has never been made, and we took a 3 million square foot plant and $150 million annual payroll, and we replaced it with nothing in terms of job development. So if we can get our economic development right, we'll have the tax revenue such that we can lower the regressive taxes like sales tax as an example. And I'd love to see some of the taxes lowered on the small businesses too. I hear many cases of people paying franchise tax when the business they run really isn't a franchise at all. So I'm very business friendly as long as the companies that operate here are people friendly and citizen friendly. Well, I understand there is a push for that. I would be very cautious about undergoing that sort of drastic change. Now, there are positive and negatives to it. First of all, in Louisiana, we do have a tendency to want to do amendments all the time, whether they're really necessary or not. In my view, we're passing 5, 6, 7 amendments every year, and our Constitution has been amended over 200 times since it was put into place about 35 years ago. I would, in one respect, I would say that it would clean up a lot of things if we had a new Constitution. On the other hand, from what I see right now in the state, I'm appalled by the pay-for-play type of funding and lobbying system that is going on in Baton Rouge. And I have friends, very close friends, in communities that are suffering from environmental atrocities that are happening right in their backyards. And I would be afraid that if we were to change the Constitution, we would change some of the protections that are afforded under our Constitution to the people. Another thing that I see that we're not even following our current Constitution, we need to start following it before we start thinking about rewriting it, because there are purposes for why we have it in there saying we need equity within our public school systems. Every student should have a textbook. Well, there are all kinds of gimmicks and tricks that are being used to get around that. And in over 24 schools within our district, the students do not have textbooks to take home. And I assure you those aren't the magnet schools. My daughter just graduated from Caddo Magnet High School. She had a textbook to take home every night. When I sit down and want to study a new subject, I really like to read from a hard copy book. I have an iPad, but I find it more, especially if I have to work out problems and have to go back and page back through the chapter. These are the kinds of things that our Constitution mandates that we have. We're not even following them in the first place. How are we going to think about amending it? Now, I don't think our heart is fully in the right place in Louisiana right now. And I would like to see us have some much more strict lobbying laws and laws, the way committee members conduct themselves during sessions, and how lobbyists are able to go to districts and to try to change votes by offering infrastructural upgrades and things to specific legislators. These kinds of things are not allowed in other states, and yet we're doing them here. Now, I don't see the drive to get rid of that kind of thing by this new Constitutional Convention. In fact, I believe that's the kind of thing that will drive a Constitutional Convention in the state. And I just really am just making a warning here that I would be extremely cautious about that. Yes. So this is something that is definitely part of my platform. Universal pre-K is what some people call it. Some people call it funded child care. I think it is an important initiative to secure the funding for, but it's not just a thing that you can just say, well, here's the money and it's going to work. This is going to take a lot of professional thought, educators. My own sister was an expert in early childhood education, and there are a lot of special needs that are discovered at that time, and we have to be going into this with our eyes open. How are we going to address all these needs? How are we going to make the kids kindergarten ready? It's a sad tragedy, and this data was presented to me by Clay Walker, who would know, the head of juvenile justice. He said that only 40% of the children in Caddo Parish are kindergarten ready by the time they enter kindergarten. And some people don't take this seriously. Some people say, oh, let them be kids, let them enjoy themselves. They don't realize that as was pointed out in the question, that is a very critical time for neural networks to develop in the brain, for maturity, for the ability to understand language and letters. And these are the kinds of things that aren't covered just in playtime. So what we need is, first of all, funding. We need prepared staff that we're going to treat like professionals. They're only paid an average of about $8.95 an hour. That's not enough in our daycares if we're going to consider them to be educators. When I say universal, I say it's a universal opportunity. No truant officer is going to be coming to the door and say, well, little Jimmy didn't show up at preschool. Okay, this is the parent's option, but I believe that a lot of parents would take this as a huge godsend, and it would be really a gift, the best thing, the best investment that we can make. The other thing is, how are we going to set the standards? It's certainly not going to be the sort of test-based standards that we have in our public schools from K through 12. But we need very wise standards and objectives, and a rather laid-back approach with the children to be able to achieve those. And the last thing is, we really have to make this not only a commitment to the young people, but to their families, because the families at this time are stretched, not only financially, but for time and socially, and we have to have a commitment to keep the families together, to keep the parents engaged with their children in the evenings, even on the drive to school in the morning. I used to recite the ABCs and the numbers with my child on the way to preschool every day. So it was something that was a very memorable experience, and I know it was part of the reason why she was ready for kindergarten when she went. We can give that support if we really take the problem seriously and treat it with compassion. Yes, so K through 12, I see it as a real travesty in terms of the inequity. And Caddo Parish is as good of an example as any, although it really is a statewide problem that I see throughout North Louisiana and elsewhere. So I've already mentioned, but I want to re-emphasize that I believe that our students are being over-tested in schools. And you can ask the students. I do after-school programs. The kids look forward all day. If the program's once a week, they look forward to that day, and they look forward to coming all day to a program that's going to be different from the way that school is conducted during the rest of the day. We do project-based learning, and we do hands-on work, and we teach the students through inquiry methods, but also let them explore and build things on their own to see how things work. And then we ask them questions, and we have them ask us questions. And this is the way that students really want to learn. It's the way our minds are wired to learn. Learning shouldn't be a set of GLE standards imposed on the teachers from on high, and then the teachers are put in this pressure cooker and say, perform or else, we're going to be rated failing. That demoralizes the teachers. That's why a lot of teachers don't even want to stay in the profession, and honestly, it demoralizes and disinterests the students. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've seen the way students respond when we teach them in other ways. In my area, science, we never fell under Common Core in our K through 12 schools, and I think that was a benefit. However, I see in the new next generation science standards that have been proposed and adopted in Louisiana, I see some issues, some problems with it. I don't feel that the teachers have the professional development to make that transition. Everything is based on phenomenon. Well, phenomenon are very interesting if you've been trained to be able to take a certain phenomenon, like what creates the phases of the moon, for example, and then explain all the science behind it. That's something that, after we've been doing something so differently for all these years, to suddenly change gears and throw a teacher in that situation and say, here, come up with the curriculum for this. It's daunting. And it would be even daunting to me if I were in their shoes, and I have a PhD in chemistry. So I would like to see more professional development, and I do believe that our teachers should be paid better. I don't like that some people were making light of the fact that this pay raise was even given. I think it was a good thing, but it was far too inadequate. And I also want to see a better interface between higher education and companies, and that's something that I'm prepared to do. I can be that interface because I work with the K through 12 schools, I help them succeed in college, and I can speak the language of technology companies too. So I think I'm a perfect fit for a state representative. Well, first of all, I think it was very unfortunate that way back, dozens, maybe more than 60 years ago, we decided that in our education, our higher education and our K through 12 system, that we weren't going to allow our teachers and professors to be part of Social Security. And I think we set out a commitment there then that we were going to fund their retirement all ourselves. And the retirement system is underfunded because we have not been putting enough money in as a state. Now the employees are making up some of that, and the state is now having to make up some of that. So we're doing a bit better than we did when I first came to the state almost 20 years ago, but we haven't closed the gap. And I worry that every time we have an economic downturn, that it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So it's going to be a very slow road back to getting that system out of its deficit. I don't know why the decision was made not to participate in Social Security. I think it was about trying to oppose the federal government in big government. But the problem is that we passed up a possible advantage that we could have had that other states have. So we've taken that burden all upon ourselves. And when you do that, you have to step up and fulfill your obligations. So what we've done is we've rated trust funds, and we've tried to lower the contributions that we're providing into these retirement systems, and even talked about doing away with them altogether. But I just don't think that is a good plan, especially when we don't even allow Social Security for our citizens. So going forward, I would say that we definitely need to live up to the commitment that we've made to fund the retirement of our state employees. And that also applies to municipal workers as well. And we have significant problems in our municipalities with unmet liabilities specifically related to retirement. And I don't want to see the state have to take those burdens on. It's something that is happening, and it is something that I would like to see addressed, but I am against state takeovers. One of the things that I see as a tremendous detriment in our state is the industrial tax exemption program, where we are giving away billions of dollars, and yet we're asking very little in return. And we're under the delusion here that these companies will leave for some better deal somewhere else just because we're not giving them all of these tax breaks. I would like the industrial tax exemption program to stay in place, but to have some set expectations for what we get from doing it. Okay. Yes, we are low in a number of areas, and those include environmental stewardship, health of our people, and opportunity. We're very low, last if not, maybe second or third from last in all of those categories. So in terms of I'll start with the health of our people. It is a good thing that we've already got the ball rolling on expanding Medicaid, because the Medicaid expansion, I think, is one of the better things that we've done in the past 4 years. This was a federal funded program. 100% of it currently is being provided by the federal government. We need to stick with this. And at worst, by historical precedent, they've never dropped below funding 90% of state Medicaid. Some people say, well, don't do it because you're going to get stuck with everything after a few years. That was politics, because there's no historical precedent, nor is there the threat of that even happening. So what we were doing was taking all of our money that we were contributing to this expansion towards the expansion of the program in other states, and we were getting nothing of it. So to be able to give Medicaid expansion dollars to people that were of the lowest income level has not only improved their health, but it's improved their economic standing and the economic standing of our entire state, because before the state was covering those costs entirely, or the hospital systems were, which was punishing physicians and healthcare workers as well, when the patients would have no alternative but to show up in an emergency room. It was inhumane. So we are addressing it. I want to stick with that and stay on course with that. We also need more preventive medicine. A lot of things that I hear from former students that have gone on to become doctors is that they're frustrated by the fact that their patients don't have the wherewithal to always follow all of their instructions. We should have people that are the follow-up liaisons, communicators, preventive medicine specialists that are going to keep the people engaged, not with the big jargon and the threats of here's what's going to happen to you, you'll be dead in 6 months if you don't do this, but in a very conversive way, a very humane way, because that's the key to lowering our costs. The thing about opportunity relates to our educational system. Again, we have so many failing schools, not only in this area but everywhere else. People said, well, we're going to make a pitch for Amazon's headquarters. I mean, that's pie in the sky. Let's fix our educational system, and then maybe we can make a pitch for a real automotive manufacturer, or maybe an Amazon distribution center. But we're really not anywhere close to thinking the way they would think in other states like New York City or Washington. Yes. I would like to talk about the importance of my concerns about the Red River. So the Red River, as I think people are aware, has been high, very high, for the past 5 or 6 years. And when I mean high, it's at flood stage for 4 to 5 months out of the year. This is a concern for 2 reasons. First of all, we saw what happened in 2015. We had a 75-year flooding event in terms of rainfall. That was a very serious flood by our standards here. We saw the water up to the front doors of Sideport. We saw roads underwater. We saw people's homes underwater. We saw homes that are built on the wrong side of levees virtually destroyed. And we need to recognize that what we've done to alter the course of that river by putting the locks and dams in there is something that requires constant maintenance now. And when I say we, I mean it's our responsibility to make noise to the Army Corps of Engineers and say, look, you did this. You take the responsibility and you help us dredge this river. And what they're doing now is they're just dredging it like I used to play in a sandbox as a kid. They're taking the silt out of the channel and they're just moving it over. That's not lowering the level of the river. So the river needs to be dredged, the silt needs to be taken out of the river, and we're the unlucky ones because there are 5 locks and dams, and we in Shreveport are just behind lock dam number 5, which is about 10 miles south of us. And so we're getting all the silt, and we're getting the most of the slowdown and the flatness of the river that's resulting in the flooding. The other concern is the groundwater. When the river is high, there's a lot of hydrostatic pressure on the Red River Aquifer, which is our shallow groundwater. When there's pressure from the high river, the groundwater rises. And this is one of the reasons why we're seeing problems with our sewage lines as the river recedes. You see sagging of those lines, you see rupturing lines, you see roads that suddenly sink and crack, and we're seeing people's foundations that are cracking now. And the U.S. Geological Survey has cautioned us. They say they've seen this in other cities, that when the rivers are high for a long period of time, the groundwater rises. We don't want to end up with damaged foundations all up and down the river, and it could go 3-4 miles out like they're seeing in Bossier. So the state can do some of it, but it's going to cost $350 million. We have to push that the Army Corps of Engineers bears the brunt of this cost, at least 80% of it. And this is all the more reason that when we do have money, and we do get the good fortune of getting a settlement to compensate for a tremendous loss like we had with that BP spill, that we spend that money wisely and not go divert it into something that we don't need.